One of my regular viewers, username NotQuiteFirst, recommended this Sopranos book and suggested that I do one of my book versus movie type comparison videos, but with The Sopranos. Turns out that was an excellent suggestion, so thank you very much. This book here came out in 2002, and it features 5 complete scripts for some of the most notable episodes from the show's first 3 seasons. If these are the finished scripts, isn't that just what's in the episode? Yes and no. In TV production scripts, and scripts in general, they go through many revisions and updates. When a script is done, finished, completed, everyone's happy with it, and they decide, okay, this is what we're going to go out and shoot. It's called a shooting script. While they may have filmed everything in here, not everything in here, as written, ended up in the final episodes. As we walk through the pilot episode, you can see that some things were added, possibly on-site, on-location changes that they thought of while they were shooting the episode. Some little line tweaks, maybe ad-libs from the actors, and some scenes were even reordered. Most of these changes and tweaks that I'm pointing out aren't really super important, huge earth-shattering kind of things that I notice, but I'm just trying to point out from someone who does know a bit of editing in the production world what the thought process might have been for why all these little changes were made. Enough of me blabbing, let's get into the script versus final episode for the first episode of The Sopranos. The way I noted all these changes was I played the pilot episode and I would just have this book open and read along and just pause it very often and mark any changes as I went. So I noticed some changes from the very first scene where Tony arrives in Dr. Melvi's office. For example, on page 4 here, she asks him, "You were unable to breathe, possibly a panic attack." In the episode, those lines were reversed.
Possibly a panic attack? You were unable to breathe?
Not really a big change, just starting off with the interesting little thing I noticed. The next change actually is on the same page, just 2 lines down, and the script's direction says, after Melfi asks, "You don't agree that you had a panic attack?" it says, "Tony laughs at that, maybe a little too loud." However, in the final finished episode, we can see he doesn't laugh.
And they sent me here.
You don't agree that you had a panic attack?
Little bit of a tonal change. Like in the script here, Tony's a little more flippant, like he's not taking this too seriously. However, in the episode, he seems to actually really be bothered by his presence there. The next change I noted came on the very next page, page 6, and it's the scene where Tony is showing us the ducks in his pool.
A couple months before all this, these 2 wild ducks landed in my pool. It was amazing. They're from Canada or someplace, and it was mating season. They had some ducklings.
That "they had some ducklings" line is not here in the actual script. And it's not a huge difference, but I do think it's interesting because it helps emphasize the fact that the ducks, particularly the baby ducks, represent his family and his children in his mind.
They're from Canada or someplace, and it was mating season. They had some ducklings.
And this line where Tony describes Meadows' friend Hunter as being a bad influence, they actually moved that up a few lines in the final finished episode. In the script, it was down a few lines.
Now my wife feels this friend is a bad influence.
So cool you're going to be able to come to Aspen with my family at Christmas.
The next changes I noted are in the scene when Tony and Christopher are about to go out and beat up that guy Mahaffey at the corporate park. In the script, Christopher says, "Back there, see, with the boo-boo in red." However, in the final episode, it was pink. I wonder if that's because they couldn't get a red outfit for her and maybe they just had a pink one available, so they changed that.
Yeah, right there next to the boo-boo in pink.
Also, in the final episode, there was this line where Tony says, "My friend Mahaffey pulling his taffy."
My friend Mahaffey pulling his taffy.
That was not in the original script. I kind of like that because it's a little bit of improv, a little character moment for Tony there.
Back up.
My friend Mahaffey pulling his taffy.
When the episode cuts back to Tony in Melfi's office, there's this little "I see" plus a beat or a pause. It's the same thing. Before Tony says, "We just had coffee."
Nothing. We had coffee.
Taking these out shows that Tony is quick on his feet when thinking about how to respond to a civilian regarding his mafia activities. An interesting bit of action description here in the script was that it says Mahaffey gets hit by the car and flies about 30 feet and crashes into the ground. I don't know if that's supposed to be an exaggeration, and in the episode he just kind of got hit and fell down. This little bit of banter between Tony and Christopher was left out of the episode, but I wish they had included it because I think it's pretty funny, and it could have been one of those classic Christopher lines. "Christopher, what are you thinking about?" Tony, "HMOs." Christopher, "Homos?" Tony, HMO, it's a medical care provider. Read a fucking paper once in a while, Christopher. In the episode when Tony has his meeting with Uncle Junior at this restaurant, the script just says that when Tony approaches him, he pats the back of his neck and says, "Uncle June, how you doing?" However, in the final episode, we notice that Tony actually does a little handgun thing and goes, "Don't move," when he approaches him.
Don't move. Uncle John, how you doing?
I like that. It's more creative. It's fun. Another small little word change here is that in the script, in this voiceover, Tony is supposed to say crabby, but in the final episode, he says cranky.
Good guy, just getting old. Cranky.
There are some interesting things you can notice when you read along with the script and watch something. For example, I never actually realized Christopher was driving the car in this exterior shot when Tony shows up to his mom's house. I've seen the show a number of times and I just never noticed Chris was driving the car. I thought Tony pulled up by himself. Next change I found was in the scene where everyone's at the Soprano house and Tony collapses from his panic attack. There's this interesting little bit in the script that's not in the final episode where we see Uncle Junior arriving at the Soprano house with a present, and he says he brought some fresh arugula from his garden. They left it out, which is fine because it doesn't really add to anything. Like how I never noticed Chris was driving that car, I also never noticed that Uncle Junior was there at the Soprano house running over with everyone to help Tony when he collapses. And speaking of that, there's also a shot that we don't see in the final episode that was described in the script here that shows Silvio and his family arriving, but it would also explain why Silvio is there running over to help when Tony collapses. When Tony is getting checked for his panic attacks and he goes into the MRI machine, the script describes some Tony POV shots that never made it into the final episode. Tony's POV. A weird prism look 90 degrees past his own head that allows him to keep tenuous visual contact with Carmela as he goes into the machine. Carmela soothes his hair, says something loving, but the MRI machine makes its hellish hammering which drowns out everything and continues into pork store, blah blah blah. Next scene. Carmela was trying to make up for the fact that she just said he's going to hell when he dies, so she was trying to say something nice, but he never actually heard it because the MRI machine is noisy. I don't know what this little bit here means in the script. It's talking about the scene where Chris meets that guy at the pork store to kill him, and it says this as they go into ... Then it describes scene 37 as omitted. I have no idea what that means. Maybe there's a whole nother scene that actually never made it in. I think it's interesting in the script that they actually described Christopher having lines of coke laid out on a meat cleaver. Way later in the show, Cleaver is the name of that movie that Christopher makes. The script does not describe those close-ups to the famous older mob-related guys, so that was probably a creative decision made on location and done in editing. The scene with Chris killing the guy in the pork store ends with a line in the script that was cut from the final episode. The script describes Christopher turning to one of the dead lamb's heads and he asks, "Can you see him yet? Has he arrived where you are?" Honestly, I'm kind of glad they left that out because that seems a little too deep and philosophical for Christopher. That scene where Carmela is hanging out with the priest and they hear a noise and then go outside and it actually turns out to be Meadow trying to sneak out of the house at night. There's that cool shot where Carmela gets the AK-47 out of the hidden compartment in that decorative pillar in their house. The script actually does not describe that decorative pillar. It just says a closet. She gets the gun from a closet. So if I had to guess, that cool little creative choice to have the gun in the decorative pillar in their house was thought of on location. It was thought of on the spot because of the uniqueness of the house. So the script actually has a couple extra lines of Meadow complaining and whining and being a brat. I can see why they cut them out. They're not really that important. Just more of, teenage drama. So this wasn't in the script, and this could just be me, but when Melfi relaxes and stretches her hands back behind her head, she kind of is posing like the statue that's out in her lobby. Could just be me. I don't know. Looks similar. This next one isn't a change either. I just think it's interesting how Silvio comes up, says this line, says,
Stay with drinks on the house all night.
It's just an interesting instance of how in the pilot, Silvio isn't a 100% mobbed up guy. He's like a mob associate, more or less just the Bada Bing owner in the pilot script. When the family is showing Livia around the Green Grove retirement community, there's a shot that's described in the script that was not in the final episode, where the other residents look up and it's described Tony is turning crimson, either with embarrassment or frustration. This isn't too important, but it does show more of the negative effects Tony's mom has on him. Next, I found an instance of scenes being reordered. This isn't a huge reorder, but a reorder. The family showing Livia around Green Grove, that's scene number 46. The next scene, scene number 47, is the scene where Christopher and Big Pussy are dumping that body near the dumpster. So in the final episode, the scene of Christopher and Big Pussy dumping that body near the dumpster actually came before scene 45, which was the guys talking at the Bada Bing. There was this line from Tony that was left out of the final episode where Tony is saying how humiliated his mom made him feel at Green Grove. Something that's interesting to me is that the very next line, Dr. Melfi says, "For us baby boomers, dealing with our parents aging is extremely painful." The script actually describes Tony as being 40 years old at the pilot episode, which was filmed around 1996, I think. So 40 years before that would make Tony born in the late 1950s, around then. And it's just crazy to think how old Tony would be if he was actually still alive today. If he was a real person, obviously. There was a little line reversal here from the way it was written in the script to the final episode.
But the tickets were comps. Tony is a labor leader.
I think the final episode's order of these lines works better because saying Tony is a labor leader is an obvious bullshit thing to say, and it works better for Artie's obviously bullshit pleading tone. Next item is also not a change from script to episode, just something that is different from the pilot in general to the rest of the series, is that when Big Pussy and Hesh are walking that guy out on the bridge over the waterfalls to intimidate him, in the rest of the series, Hesh is more of a behind-the-scenes guy. He's not actually actively doing mafia stuff, threatening people with the guys. He's like the mafia bank or something. The scene where Artie returns the tickets to Tony in the script, that ends different than the final episode. They probably filmed this and just cut it out for pacing reasons. So the script says, "Arthur, thank you, I meant that." He skulks off. Christopher has been watching sullenly. Tony stares at the tickets in frustration. "Tony, this fucking thing again. How do I help my friend, huh?" Christopher shrugs listlessly. "Tony, the fuck you sulking about?" Tears fill Christopher's eyes. He storms out, kicking stuff. "Tony, the fuck's wrong with him?" Polly Walnuts. "Probably shooting fucking crank again." "Tony, where's the maturity? That's what I want to know." And then the next scene again is omitted, so who knows what was there. The script describes the hostess at the fancy restaurant as doing a Roman shrug.
Sir, as I explained, people are not leaving their tables and there are 5 parties ahead of you.
I have no idea what that means. I googled it but couldn't find an answer easily showing up. Does anyone know what that means? What's a Roman shrug? In the scene where Tony is fooling around with Irina on his boat, the script actually has no mention of those lines they said in the final episode about the hat belonging to JFK.
Come on, it's JFK's hat. I put it down.
But it's just another interesting instance of the Soprano family's general interest in John F. Kennedy was as early on as the pilot episode. I actually forgot about this line until I was watching again and reading along for doing this, but I think it's hilarious how Tony says Hannibal Lecter.
What do you think? I was Hannibal Lecter before or something?
There was this interesting, brief little scene that was left out of the final episode. The young secretary who witnessed Alex Mahaffey's beating and Christopher are post-coital and looking at the TV where aged Pussy Malanga is taken away by wheelchair. So remember when Christopher and Tony intimidated and beat up that guy at the corporate park?
Yeah, right there next to the boo-boo in pink.
So apparently Christopher was sleeping with that girl, and this takes place just after they had sex, and the announcer voice on the TV says Malanga, also known as Little Pussy, was released after questioning, but not before an ugly scene at Newark Airport. Young woman, whispering, "Are you gonna break somebody's leg?" Christopher, shushing her. "So it's gonna go down soon." Tony, "I think I figured a way to put this to bed." Two things about this. One, I don't think Christopher in the rest of the show would say something that obvious to a civilian like, "So it's going to go down soon." And two, why is Tony here? Christopher and this girl having sex. What's Tony doing in the scene? I don't know. When they cut back to Tony in Dr. Melfi's office, Tony has this little line that is not in the final episode about a saying his father used to say that didn't make sense. You know, I can see why they cut this because it doesn't really add to anything. Same scene, like 2 lines down, there's a little line from Tony that's not in the final episode about how Sinatra could be Italian for without ducks, because apparently Anatra means ducks in Italian, so Sinatra is without ducks. Interesting, but doesn't really add to anything. The next thing, to me, is the most interesting thing that was probably filmed, but ultimately cut from the final episode. Soprano family backyard, daytime, barbecue grill, steaks and sausages, hiss and sizzle. Tony sips a beer, tends to the steaks. He looks towards the house, where guests are starting to arrive. The fire belches smoke, and exterior, cathedral, day, skewed, low angle, more smoke. Meadow is being burned at the stake. Hooded medieval figures toss wood onto the fire. She shouts at the leaden sky with a crazed smile. The wind and flames lashing her face. Meadow, yes, yes! After the dream sequence of Meadow being burned at the stake, it cuts to Meadow's bedroom. Meadow's face aglow with fantasy. She swigs coffee, writes furiously in her journal. Knock, knock. Carmela peeks in. Carmela, guests are arriving, and the table isn't set. How many cups of coffee have you had? while she's writing. Be right there. Carmela hesitates a second, then holds out new ski boots. Meadow, you mean I can go to Aspen? Carmela, spring break is just that, a break. When you go back to school, you'll really apply yourself. Meadow, speeding. I was just thinking I probably shouldn't go, so close to finals. Carmela, thrown. Excuse me? Meadow, urgent. I was just writing in my journal how somebody in this family has to do something. Carmela, well, about what? Meadow, perfection, earthly perfection. It's a soprano tradition. Carmela, it is? Meadow, I may become a nun. I have to look up our family motto. I think the web has a genealogy bulletin board. She starts scribbling again. Carmela stares, pole-axed. She leaves the room in a fog. Weird scene, huh? I can't see Meadow actually saying that. This next item is actually fairly well known, and there's this bit of direction in the script where it says Tony, quote, grabs and shakes Christopher. That's all it says. However, in the episode, he actually furiously grabs him and is way more violent. If I remember, I think it was David Chase or someone said that this was a key moment where they knew that James Gandolfini was the right person to play Tony Soprano. This was a creative decision from James Gandolfini himself. He felt that Tony would actually be a lot more mad, so he just grabbed Christopher and pinned him up, and I like that. It shows Tony's anger. It's cool. When Junior and Livia are driving around, there's this line from Junior to Livia where he says, if he could steal you away from me, referring to Johnny Boy Soprano. This is some interesting character backstory that isn't touched on much, but only mentioned a little bit later on when some people think that Junior and Livia are an item because of their secret Green Grove meetings. Last item from tonight comes from the same scene with Junior and Livia driving around. It clearly spells out how Junior has Livia's blessing to potentially do something about Tony. That was in the episode. It's just interesting to see it clearly spelled out in the script. They actually underline this. It says he has her blessing. So this is a way to show that Livia's secretly calling all the shots behind the scenes. Well, that's about all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this script versus episode comparison for the Sopranos pilot episode. If you guys seem to be enjoying this, leave some comments. Let me know what you think about this. And if people like this, maybe I'll move on to the next one, which would be the college episode. What else we got here? We got the Happy Wanderer, the Knight in White Satin Armor, and Pine Barrens. So, you know what? Screw it. I'll be doing these anyway. I don't care if people watch this or not. Have a good night.